It gives me the greatest of pleasure to welcome to the conference and to introduce the Revd Dr Sam Wells. I'm sure he doesn't need a lot of introduction to many of you. He's very well known across a number of fronts and has experience that will have intersected with yours in a number of different ways over the years. He was and is a parish priest. He's currently the Vicar of St Martin-in-the-Fields. He's also exercised priestly ministry in East Anglia and the North East. He is also an academic. He has been the university professor at Duke University, the Divinity School there, which I understand from what I've read about him was a really seminal experience for him. He's an ethicist. He's a theologian. A writer of over 30 books, a broadcaster, and the reason that we've invited him here is because he is so wonderfully adept at connecting the Christian faith to the experience, the life as lived by people, sometimes people in not very wonderful circumstances. I'm particularly grateful to Dr. Wells for his production of a wonderful set of Eucharistic prayers. For those of you in the Anglican tradition, if you haven't encountered joining the Angel's Song and you want a Eucharistic prayer that reaches to the readings that have accompanied a Sunday Eucharist, then that is the book to get hold of. And I can assure you the feedback is from Congregatio Unifor. They love them. Please write some more. Anyway, without more ado, I would like to welcome the Reverend Dr. Sam Wells.
Thank you for those kind words, and thank you for having me. I want to talk about the crisis of faith, and I want to talk about it in 4 genres in terms of addressing it. And I guess I'm thinking of this particularly in relation to the communities that you serve, and how difficult it is to generalise about them. So I'm coming at questions of apologetics from in 4 different tones of voice. The first is about sensing and perceiving, trying to put your finger on a pulse, and then I move to the notion of invitation. Come and join, have a look, have a taste and see. The third is more about poetry, and the fourth is more combative. So the first one is called Sensing Crisis. There's been a major change in our culture in the last 60 years. Being a Christian is no longer a normal thing to be, and going to church is no longer a conventional thing to do. Christianity's claimed truth hasn't become any the less valid, but those of us who uphold that claim have fewer companions, and our convictions are no longer surrounded by extensive social supports, but increasingly exposed to the chill winds of indifference, scepticism, and even hostility. It's not surprising that for many of us, that erosion of Christianity's social confidence becomes internalized, especially when voiced by spouse, parent, sibling, colleague, or friend, and we sit in church with a whispering voice saying, "Why are you here? What connection has Sunday morning worship got to reality?" What I've described is the experience of a collective crisis of faith. And to explore what it involves and what to do about it, I want to reflect on perhaps the most significant story in the whole of the Old Testament, the account of the parting of the Red Sea and the liberation of the Israelites. I believe in this story lies everything that's become problematic about being a Christian in our day, but also everything that offers promise of hope and joy and renewal. The crossing of the Red Sea is the foundational story of the Old Testament, because it brings together the 3 things the Old Testament is essentially about. It's a new creation story, just as in Genesis chapter 1, God brings dry land out of chaos. God makes a kind of birth experience of the waters breaking and a new people coming into being. God speaks and things happen, and the result is new life. It's a story of liberation. God wants Israel to be free, sees Israel's plight in slavery to the Pharaoh, creates a path to freedom and destroys the powers of oppression. And it's a portrayal of covenant. God cares for Israel. God is sovereign over the natural environment, and Israel in turn responds through the obedience of Moses and the active participation of the people. Creation, liberation, and covenant. It's the whole of the Old Testament crystallized in around a dozen verses. Now, what I want you to see is that once this whole theological canvas fitted onto our culture and society as comfortably as a jacket slips onto a person's back and arms and shoulders. It fitted philosophically because Britain saw itself as the new Israel, which had inherited the status of God's favourite nation and had a role to play in civilizing the world and bringing order, peace, and justice like a new but better Roman Empire. It was taken for granted that God was all-powerful and that the parting of the oceans was all of a piece with creating them in the first place. It fitted morally because Britain, whose citizens insisted, you'll remember, that we never, never shall be slaves, was a kind of guardian of justice and freedom throughout the world and saw itself as a kind of collective Moses figure, achieving astonishing things through its industrial revolution that rolled back the tide of ignorance and inefficiency and laying down laws that commanded the loyalty of peoples the world over. And it fitted culturally because our leaders were regarded with a degree of deference that assumed they had a kind of divine right to advance the benevolent hand of British authority, which included fostering the expansion and flourishing of the church as justification and guarantee of righteousness. But over the last 150 years, that set of assumptions by which the crossing of the Red Sea was taken to be a story about us, that affirmed our place in the cosmos, in the world, and in the social hierarchy, a package underwritten by Bible, church, and God, has come under three kinds of assault. It's come under historical assault because scientists and philosophers have said the kind of Charlton Heston-style rearing up of the waves can't happen. This is the most dramatic of a host of biblical miracles that just don't sit alongside a modern worldview. This story was probably created by tribes in Canaan as a myth of origins to explain their distinctive identity and strong cause of unique calling. It's come under moral assault because critics have said, what kind of a God is this who chooses a favourite people, exercises extensive violence to rescue them, and mercilessly leaves the Egyptians strewn across the shore? If God has this ability to control wind and waves and cares about the plight of the oppressed, how about doing a better job with steering tornadoes away from population centres and delivering innocent Sri Lankans from the hands of marauding and murderous terrorists? And it's come under a more subtle cultural assault because activists have said if Britain is a post-colonial power that retains a seat on the Security Council, surely it's a self-serving misreading of the story to characterise us as the powerless Israelites. Wouldn't it be more accurate to say we Western powers are more like the Egyptians in this story? And a true fulfilment of the story's promises would leave us and our geopolitical hegemony strewn across the shore. This historical, moral and cultural critique amounts to a formidable assault, and it's what has dismantled the Church's sense of ease, confidence and entitlement in British society. For many people, the Church's historical, moral and cultural authority is significantly compromised. Christians have responded to this onslaught in three ways: a bad way, an inadequate way, and a good way. The bad way is simply to shout louder, to claim the privileges and status of the past as entitlements, to employ nostalgic notions of being a Christian country, to use influence, manipulation or force to make things as much as possible like they used to be. Such actions make the problem far worse than it would otherwise be. The inadequate way is more or less to give up on the outward trappings of Christianity and retreat into an interior realm of spirituality and mood music and untroubling benevolence. The trouble with this is the crossing of the Red Sea is an intensely political, conflictual and public story. Creation, liberation and covenant aren't interior experiences in the Old Testament. They're about society, slavery, escape, social change and struggle. Assuming the Red Sea story simply endorsed British colonialism may have been distorted and mistaken, but turning the story into the stimulus for interior equilibrium renders the Old Testament meaningless. So what is the better way? If Christians in this country respond to the cultural revolution that I've described without defensiveness and with a healthy dose of humility, I believe we'll recognise that this revolution has made us able to read the account of the crossing of the Red Sea with fresh eyes. No longer will we read the story, and Christianity in general, as affirming our social standing, our favoured place in the world, or any sense of entitlement. Instead, we'll take the following lessons from the story. Number one, God's fundamental purpose, beginning with creation, is to be in relationship with us, not just personally, but collectively. The biblical word for which is covenant. God will not rest, and creation will not be fulfilled until this desire for full, profound, and universal relationship comes to pass. Every time we form or restore relationships of this kind, especially in the face of adversity or hostility, we are imitating God's signal purpose. Number two, in order to make such relationships of trust, commitment, and reconciliation, we need to experience a significant degree of freedom. God wills to liberate us, not because we should be allowed to do whatever we like, but because we exercise freedom most fully by forming and restoring fruitful relationships. Number three, Jesus models what it means for God to seek relationship with us, what it entails to bear the cost of our hostility, and what it involves to restore relationship through forgiveness, reconciliation, and healing. The early Christians saw the crossing of the Red Sea as the prototype of resurrection, and they embodied its deliverance in the sacrament of baptism. Number four, the Church is given the stories of Scripture and the counsel of the Holy Spirit constantly to relocate itself in the places and among the people where this balance of liberation and covenant is taking place. Sometimes it gets things terribly wrong and realizes that it has turned into the oppressive Egyptians. Sometimes it gets things right and has the exhilarating experience of feeling protected by God's power and close to God's glory and alive in freedom and hope. And finally, number five, the Church looks forward to the day when, like Israel in this story, it rejoices on another shore, with dancing and singing and love and laughter and wonder and joy, with all the powers that oppress it in disarray, and with God very present and close and forever and true. Earlier I said the crossing of the Red Sea was the Old Testament in a dozen verses. In fact, it's more than that. What I've just described to you is the whole of Christianity in 5 acts, like a great drama. There's creation, covenant, Christ, church, and finally consummation. And every single one of those great dimensions of God's story are present in embryo in a dozen verses of the book of Exodus. So this story isn't just the whole of the Old Testament, it's the whole Bible, the whole of everything, the entire story of God and us. And here's the point. For centuries we clung to this story and others like it to justify our standing in the world. For the last 150 years, that hegemony has come under wave upon wave of criticism, which has depleted the Church's confidence just as it has created in many people a crisis of individual faith. But the truth is, most of that criticism was fully justified. And here's the great irony. That criticism was in the spirit of the original story. And on the other side of that formidable challenge lies a deeper understanding of the Exodus, of the Church, and of God. Once we let go, and only once we let go of our certainty that this story has to enhance our security, status, and strength, we can begin to discover that this story reveals to us the purpose of existence, the nature of our struggle, and the heart of God. Just going to leave 30 seconds of silence at the end of that first one and pick up again with the number 2. This one is called Invitation to Dance. Ballet is a form of performance dance whose roots are in 14th century Italy. Over the centuries, it's become globally recognised and has formed the foundations of many other kinds of dance. It became shaped by French terminology and technique after Catherine de' Medici became Queen of France in 1547. The heart of ballet and the centre of every dancer's training lies in the 5 positions in which it is standard to place one's feet on the floor. First position means pointing the feet flat, touching and turned out. Second position is the same, with the feet 12 inches apart. In third position, the feet are placed adjacent but in opposite directions, with the toe of each touching the arch of the other. Fourth position is the same, with one foot 12 inches in front of the other. And fifth position, which is the really difficult one, is similar to third position, but with the 2 feet entirely overlapping one another. If you can do all 5 positions, you're well on the way to being trained in ballet. The point, of course, is not to know what the positions are, but to reproduce them as second nature. When you first come into contact with Christianity, you can feel a lot like ballet. Not because its practitioners are lithe, talented, and disciplined, present company accepted, or because the result is usually melodious and beautiful, but because there's a lot of technical jargon, much of it in a foreign language, because people seem to be passionate about it and have never got the time to explain why, and because it hits you somewhere so deep and so visceral that quite quickly it starts to shape the way you think and move and live. When you read the absorbing roll call of people of faith in Hebrews chapter 11, it's like being inducted into a hall of fame, a catalogue of the great ballet dancers since 1400. It makes faith exotic because it involves conquering kingdoms, shutting the mouths of lions, quenching raging fire, escaping the edge of the sword, being stoned to death, and being sawn in two. But it can give a misleading impression that faith is for superheroes. In fact, the opposite is the case. Like a ballet teacher, I want to walk through the 5 steps of faith, to explore what it means to join what we could call God's dance. First position is there's a reality that's deeper, truer, and more permanent than this one. Before about 300 years ago, this was a largely uncontroversial assumption. So much of life was unexplained, everyone took for granted it was controlled by unseen forces. But in recent centuries, the chain of cause and effect has linked so much of the known universe that it's become tempting to think it can gobble up everything. When we use the phrase people of faith, this sense of a beyond is pretty much the only thing all such people can agree on. Of course, a lot of people don't share this conviction. It's pretty much impossible to prove or disprove. But even ardent atheists in practice often operate out of an aspiration to see beyond appearances, take life further than face value, and live in the light of eternity rather than simply the realm of the 5 senses. This is the appeal of profound music, love, beauty, poetry. It reaches something beyond mere life. When it's considered an end in itself, it tends these days to take the name spiritual, but not religious. Second position is that deeper reality is a personal being who has a single overarching purpose, to be in relationship with us. This is a large step from the first one, and quickly dismantles the rather fanciful idea that people of faith all fundamentally believe the same thing. For Christians, first position doesn't count for much. True faith begins here. Here lies the reason for creation, the sense of a story with advances and setbacks and a possible ending, when that relationship is completed, celebrated, and enjoyed forever. Here also, more poignantly, emerges a context for love. After all, you can't love a deeper reality. You can only love one with whom it's possible for you to be in relationship. This is a vision you can shape your life around. Third position goes a step further again. That personal being who constitutes that deeper reality and has that single purpose is fundamentally shaped to be with us in human form, in Jesus of Nazareth, a first-century Jew who dwelt among us, showed forth his glory, died as an outcast, and rose again. This may seem to many a breathtaking leap. Interestingly, the Gospels, which you'd think would have an interest in taking us gently through first and second position and breaking the news when we are in the right mood to hear it, actually skip first and second position and come right in here. The first words of Mark's Gospel are the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. No messing there. The resurrection isn't an optional epilogue to the Gospels. The Gospels are accounts written for those who know about and trust in the resurrection, of who this person was and how he came to be crucified. The resurrection is the central moment when our past is redeemed and our future made eternal. Fourth position maintains that in Jesus we can see the foundation of a new community with God, with one another, and with the new creation. The resurrection and the sending of the Holy Spirit are a declaration of God's faith in the world, because if we were worthless, God wouldn't have given us this opportunity. This means God really intended the church as an experiment in hope that people could embody and share the risen life of freedom, justice, peace, and joy. But God also set forth the kingdom, surprising and redeeming the church by letting glory also spring up elsewhere. And fifth position is that there's a place in this story that only you can fill and is waiting for you to step into. All these previous steps remain perfectly valid in their own right, but they only take effect for you if you're open to this fifth step. Think about the litany of the faithful in Hebrews chapter 11. The writer gathers this cloud of witnesses in order to say, here are those who took up the mantle, stepped into their destiny, and entered the story with remarkable results. There would have been a story without them. God would still have found a way. But how glorious to be one of those who answered the call and fulfilled the purpose of your creation. Each of us is different, and like a ballet dancer with their own stomach muscles, legs, ankles, and feet, each of us is challenged by a different one of these 5 positions. I don't think there are many people who move logically through the 5 positions like a deductive problem solver. Instead, we wonder what our life is for, and we want our lives to make a difference, and we go straight in at number 5 and perhaps work our way back from there. Or we're captivated by the person of Jesus and move back and forth from position 3. Or maybe we believe deeply that there needs to be something more or less like the church, and we start working out the rest from position 4. And over the course of our lives, we can change which of the positions we're most drawn to, and which we find a stumbling block. When people lament that fewer people go to church in this country than 50 years ago, what they're seeing is that in our generation, people seem to find 4th position more problematic than they used to. Those people are not necessarily much differently aligned in relation to the other 4 positions. Perhaps a more general trend is that increasing numbers of people want to keep the 1st and 5th positions while bypassing the middle 3. The truth is, none of the positions make a whole lot of sense on their own. How can you want your life to make a difference if you don't have any notion of the story of which you think you are a part? What's the point in believing there's a reality deeper than this one if it makes no difference to anything else you think or do? The phrase blind faith is often used as a criticism, but it could be a description for holding tightly to one of these 5 positions while losing contact with the others. By contrast, the term simple faith is usually used as a compliment, but it could be a way of saying that you really connect with one of these positions and you're happy to let the other 4 coalesce around you. The amazing thing about the constellation of the faithful in Hebrews 11 is that even they didn't uphold all 5 positions. They all predated Jesus, so they didn't have number 3, or arguably number 4. But they still went ahead and shut the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were stoned to death, and were sawn in two. And that shows us what really matters about faith. Faith is fundamentally trust in God's faith in and faithfulness to us. There's a truth deeper than our being, a love truer than our knowing, a life beyond our comprehending, a community more significant than our experiencing, a purpose more wondrous than our discovering. Hardly anyone has perfect posture when it comes to all 5 positions. You doubt whether it was genuine if they did. But that's not the point. Faith isn't in the end about adhering to certain doctrines any more than ballet's about keeping balanced and still. We weren't made to be sure and right and certain. We were made to dance with God. And God doesn't want us to wait like a wallflower till we're confident of all 5 positions. God says, bring what you've got onto the dance floor, and I'll do the rest. Let's pause again for a minute or so. Okay, I'm going to go on to poetic essence number 3, and I'm going to take this a little bit more slowly for reasons that will become obvious. There are 2 kinds of things: those that abide forever and those that last for a limited period. The things that abide forever we call essence. The things that last for a limited period we call existence. We human beings are in the second category. We exist. We think that because we exist, because we're aware that we exist, with a heart, the centre, the purpose of all things. But we tend to forget that existence isn't all there is. We're missing something important, something vital. Existence is not the same as essence. Existence is subject to change and decay and death. Essence isn't. Yes, we do indeed exist. And that's precious and remarkable and the basis of all the joys of life. But we're not essences. We're not eternal, ineradicable, permanent. We're not essential. There is without us. Take us away and there still is. Our being depends on the existence of others. We crave independence, but it's an illusion, a fantasy. We never could be, never shall be independent. And there would be no joy in being so. The longing for independence is the aspiration to be an essence. The secret of happiness is to learn instead to exist. Why are we here? Not because we chose to be. How did our existence come about? Not because it was essential. We exist, everything exists, because the essence of things, of all things, in the depths of its mysteries, brought into being something that was not essential, something that was not like itself, but something else. We're part of that else. We're not the original something. We don't know if we're the centre of that else or the purpose of that else, but on the scientific and historical evidence it seems unlikely. We don't know whether that else might be viable or even better off without us, but it seems more than probable. So we're not just inessential to essence, we're not even existential to existence. We have no direct, unmistakable, and incontrovertible access from our realm of existence to that sphere of essence, which is why identifying the nature of that essence will always be controversial and disputed, and is also why there will always be a temptation to elevate some or all characteristics of existence to the level of essence. Sometimes we get exasperated and seek at least some firm ground, given that essence is so impenetrable. Sometimes we proudly assume that the highest glories of existence need not or could not be surpassed. It's part of the nature of existence never to be able to be certain about essence. There could have been no existence. There could have been nothing. To say there could have been, may even yet be nothing, is not to deny that there's an essence. We assume there must be an essence because something must have brought about and must sustain and replenish and will surely abide beyond existence. But there could have been nothing beyond essence. That, in fact, would seem more likely. This is where humility begins, with the recognition that it would have been simpler, more plausible, less troublesome, tidier, for there to have been no existence, in practice, nothing. Yet here we are. It might have been much more probable that we would not have existed, and it's only some balance between chance and love that has made it otherwise. Establishing the degree of that balance between chance and love is the process of discovering truth. We're lost in wonder because we're incapable of discovering what it could possibly have been that induced essence to conceive, trigger, initiate, or imagine existence. It might have all been very different. It might not be so for much longer or ever again, but it still nonetheless is. We're overwhelmed with awe at the transition from eternity to time, from boundlessness to circumscription, from the elusive and immortal to the tangible and fragile. We're bursting with gratitude when we realize that this balance of chance and love has brought about every ingredient of the circumstances that brought us into existence, that there's nothing whatsoever for which we can claim the credit, that it is all entirely gift, that we shall never be able to discharge our consequent debt, and that we must therefore remain suspended in dumbfounded astonishment and delirious reverence. Humility is that hallowed clearing in the forest of existence, where wonder, awe, and gratitude meet, dance, play, and exult. And here, in that clearing in the forest of existence, in the depths of wonder, awe, gratitude, and humility, we meet the astonishing claim of the Christian faith. On one starry night, displaced by migration, in a hostile political climate, surrounded by animals from an unwed mother living homeless in a strange town, essence entered existence. Essence which we could call by 100 names, but we most often call God. Essence which could have remained alone without ever conceiving of existence. Essence which would most straightforwardly have left things as nothing, but out of utmost grace initiated existence. That essence made itself part of existence. The Word became flesh. That's what's unique about Christianity. There's nothing special about recognizing the difference between essence and existence. Most religions do. In fact, almost everyone does, because whether you call yourself atheist, agnostic, or humanist, you probably accept a distinction between what lasts forever and what lasts for just a period of time. There's nothing special about having a code of ethics. Almost everyone does that, although there are obviously significant differences between them. There's nothing special about church buildings or hymns or a holy book. You can find equivalents in many cultures. No, this is the heart of Christianity. In Jesus, the essence of all things became part of existence, subject to change, decay, and death, just like us. It wasn't necessary. It wasn't any more necessary than essence creating existence in the first place. But once you grasp it, you can see that the two events are as linked as a pair of shoes. Why did essence create existence? No one could possibly know until this very moment when essence becomes part of existence. Here we discover the answer to perhaps the biggest question of all. Why is there something rather than nothing? The answer is because essence, or God as we usually say, always intended to be our companion, to be with us. That's what the word Jesus represents. God's eternal purpose to be with us, which triggered the whole mystery of existence from beginning to end. Jesus isn't an afterthought that came into existence when essence realized existence was going badly wrong. Jesus is the whole meaning and purpose for existence in the first place. Jesus is the reason we exist. See how this reverses the usual way of asking the question. When we place ourselves at the centre of all things, we make existence primary and demand proofs of God's existence through our getting a job or an end to war or our recovery from a painful illness. But existence isn't primary. That's what essence is. Trying to reach God from existence is as absurd and impossible as throwing a stone and trying to hit a cloud. We discover God because God reaches us. Essence becomes existence. Jesus becomes human. The Word becomes flesh. But we haven't yet reached the best bit. Here we come to the most astonishing wonder of all. Essence becoming existence in Jesus isn't the end of the story. God doesn't simply want to share our limited, fragile, earthly life. There's more to it even than that. Jesus is fully human and fully divine, complete existence, utter essence. And through him we realize what God's final purpose always was: to bring us into essence, into eternal truth. Jesus is God stretching out a hand and saying, "Come into the essence of all things to be with me." Remember the painting of God and Adam on the roof of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican in Rome. God's hand is stretched out in creation. But the final purpose of creation is that God's hand stretches out a second time in Jesus and invites us to become part of the very essence of all things. What an invitation. What a God. What an indescribable offer. What an unimaginable present. What an inexpressible gift. And the last one is called Combating Doubt, and as the title suggests, it has a different tone of voice. It's about the oldest joke in the book. In a pantomime, it's called He's Behind You. The point is, the audience can see something the character on stage can't see. The thing is, it never stops being funny. In the classic Fawlty Towers version, Basil Fawlty is horrified to find a dead body in his hotel and refuses to fess up even when the poor man's relatives come looking for him. In the drastic climax, Basil is standing with his back to the coat stand, propping up the dead man's corpse behind him. One of the man's relatives attempts to reach past Basil and claim his hat. "You can't," shouts Basil, realising that helping the man to his hat will disclose the presence of the dead body. "But I'm leaving," remonstrates the relative, only inches from the object of his request, "and I need my hat." Basil summarily replies, "We'll have it sent on," and survives to fight another day. What we're talking about is irony. Irony is where one party can see something the other party can't see, and the first party can see all the confusion the second party gets into by missing that one single piece of information. The story of Thomas is a classic piece of irony. The disciples know that Jesus has risen from the dead. He appeared to them on Easter morning and showed them his hands and side. We know that Jesus rose from the dead because we've read that part of the story. Jesus obviously knows he's risen from the dead. The only one who doesn't know is Thomas. And what a fool he makes of himself. All the disciples tell him the wonders they've seen, but he's having none of it. I've never forgotten the first time I played Jenga. It was in a circle of about 30 people, and the host arranged things as if he was about to do a magic trick. Everyone seemed to know what to do and pulled out blocks from apparently impossible angles. I had no idea what to do, so I just pulled a block out at random. Everyone laughed their heads off. Then the game began again, from the beginning. Again, everyone pulled out blocks from impossible places, and again, I assumed I should just do the same. But once again, the tower came tumbling down. I felt 2 inches high, like Thomas must have felt on that second Sunday night. Now, it's common today to read the story of Thomas a different way. We get the idea that Thomas had a point. All this resurrection stuff is a bit far-fetched, and Thomas was the plain man on the Clapham omnibus, just speaking up for common sense and honest doubt. Thomas becomes the hero of the story, not because he believed, but because he didn't. Somehow Thomas becomes the modern human being who stands in for all our misgivings about faith. This resurrection malarkey is all very well, says Thomas, but what about the fact that the universe is massive beyond imagining? How could God have singled out just this tiny planet on the edge of beyond? It's all very well, but what about all the suffering in the world? It's all very well, but what about all the other faiths? It's all very well, but what about all the evil done in the name of religion? It's all very well, but where do we actually go when we die? In all these ways, we reverse the shape of the story, and Thomas becomes this massive question mark, and it's Jesus and the disciples that look stupid, and Thomas is the righteous one who stands up for all the ambiguity and inconclusivity of modern life. No longer is the joke on Thomas, the joke's on the disciples for being so credulous and unsophisticated and just plain old. But let's just pause for a moment. Remember how irony works. In irony, the person who's caught out thinks they're the clever one. They think they can see the vital thing, whereas in fact they're missing the vital thing. In this case, we think we're the clever ones. We assume we're the centre of the universe. We take for granted that our judgments about things are the best informed such judgments have ever been. That our doubts are more intelligent than the faith of our ignorant forebears, and that we have the perfect vantage point from which to assess eternal truth. But wait a minute. We just said we occupy a small planet at the corner of an unimaginably colossal universe. We did not make this planet. We think we're clever because we can trace a largely plausible pattern of evolution, but we didn't start that evolution off, or set its terms or pace. We think suffering is a blot on the CV of an almighty creator, as if we have the blueprint for a perfect planet, and we could implement it every time, complete with eternal life, and Newcastle United winning the Premier League every season. We think there's a bunch of world religions, and we take one look at a few of the others and decide they're obviously all the same, even though the things that really matter about Christianity are things that no other faith upholds. We decry the evil done in the name of religion, quietly turning our gaze away from the evil done in the name of pretty much every profound human tradition, and rather idealising a world in which no one held any conviction dear or sought ever to arrange society around any constructive social idea. We think the fact that we have no sense experience of people who have died must mean those people have ceased in any way to exist, because of course we, who live at most for 80 years and 10, obviously have privileged access to the ultimate destiny of where beings dwell forever. Don't you see? Can't you grasp? Won't you realise that the story of Thomas is telling us the exact opposite of the way it's so often read in modernity? The story isn't saying the joke's on the naive and uneducated, deluded disciples. The joke's on us. Us, who think we're so wise, so measured, so sanguine in our scepticisms, our reluctance to believe, our shrewd detachment from the enthusiasm of following the risen one. We're the objects of the irony. Great is the mystery of faith. Yes, we are on the edge of the universe, and yes, God is infinitely different from us, not just in encompassing the universe, but in being beyond the universe. Who do we think we are to be sceptical and mistrustful of this God of utter wonder and glory? And behold, here we are, life, human life on this tiny, insignificant planet. Why? Because that other and utterly distant God wanted to be in relationship with a creature who could respond, could reciprocate, could return joy, laughter, depth, love. And just seeking relationship was not enough. That God in the fathomless mystery of love wanted to become one like us, to be in true and eternal peace with us, to communicate as one of us with us. And when, by the astonishing and perverse allergy of our nature, we hold this wondrous gift from our presence, even death could not prevent God finding a way to restore that relationship and disarm our violent rejection. And the disciples realize all of this on that first Easter evening. But Thomas is having none of it. Maybe in hurt, maybe in crushing disappointment, maybe in grief, he places his own misgivings way out above God's gracious hand of reconciliation. But the grace of God in Christ finds a way into the heart of even the great skeptic himself. And just as in the famous prologue of John's Gospel, so in this great climax, grace and truth are united again. See what that means for all our doubts. We think suffering is God's great fail, the great letter F in the heavenly exam results. But see how God takes that suffering into the divine life, demonstrating how all suffering will finally be not expunged, but like the cross transformed into a dimension of glory. We think other faiths show that everything's relative, but here we see God become one like us, be touched and wounded and handled and manhandled and pierced. Where else is such wondrous love as this? We think faith is discredited by its worst exponents when there aren't any worse examples than Jesus' first disciples, who denied and betrayed the one who was emptied of all but love. Those first disciples gathered that night in the upper room, they knew better than anyone that Jesus came for sinners who desperately need his redemption, not for saints who knew no wrong. We think we have no knowledge of where we go when we die, but isn't this precisely why Jesus came back to his disciples in flesh and blood? So that as this very story tells us, the church may believe what it hasn't seen on the strength of what it has seen. And on the strength of what we have seen, we trust that God wills not just to join us in our contemporary existence, but to draw us into the glory of divine eternity, being with the Holy Trinity together forever. That's the power of this story. We identify with Thomas. His skepticism is fair game. We think the joke's on the disciples, but we're wrong. Layer by layer, Jesus' incarnation and resurrection dismantle all our temerity in supposing we have the vantage point from which to cast our critical gaze on the paltry action of God. Jesus doesn't humiliate us by exposing our faulty logic and fragile self-importance. He just says, look for yourself. Death couldn't hold me. Neither can your misgivings. Don't dig yourself into the grave of doubt. Come out into the joyful light of faith. Do not doubt, but believe. One modern novelist said, if you're a believer, you'll fight a believer over a shade of difference. If you're a doubter, You doubt only with yourself. Come to the party, Thomas. You'll love it. We've been waiting for you. Okay, I suggest we've got 15 minutes, so I suggest you take a couple of minutes with your neighbour, exploring what the last 45 minutes were for you, and then we'll do a bit of to and fro. Okay. You're all used to doing school assemblies, so you probably don't need a microphone. Why not just shout out? Give us a hand. Go on.
Talk about crisis of faith. I find more in young people dealing with it's not so much a crisis of faith, but a crisis of belief. I'd say faith is maybe a concern in the heart, and I might say belief is about mental assent to a set of doctrines. And so, what you've done to actually really like the creativity, the scene, the poetry, combating things in the way you've done it. But on what grounds have you made your faith assertions? In other words, belief assertions. So what would I say to a young person about what you would ground your faith or belief assertions on? What's your source of authority for saying all the meditative things you've said for us today? You're speaking to the converted by and large, which is great.
I sort of assume that, yeah. They may not be the converted anymore.
What would I say to a young Muslim lad in front of me, or a young Jewish boy in my school who live out their faith in a very deep way, about the packaging that you presented your faith in?
Well, I can't say more than I've already said. I offered 4 approaches depending on 4 different contexts. If I was with the young Muslim that you've just described, I would probably take either the second, the dance, in other words, the 5 positions, starting with the kind of something must have started all this off, and going through the 5 steps, or I most likely, and to be honest, what I usually do is the third one. I mean, you could probably tell that had more of me in it than the others, and I would start by saying there's 2 kinds of things. I actually said that on Radio 4 this morning to a humanist. Exactly the same argument. There's 2 kinds of things. There's things that last forever, and there's things that don't. And humanists reject the idea that there are any things that last forever. There is no, whatever people say about Aquinas, there is no foundational starting point that is safe as houses. We're all anti-foundationalists, really.
If I was to use this term, I can't express it as eloquently as you, but if there was a point where I decided I had become a Christian, I'd become part of this community of faith, using these wonderful metaphors, how do I know I've stepped on the dance floor, or I've arrived at the party, or whichever one that you were for, different ways of looking at that. Is there a point where I need to know that?
Baptism? Call me old-fashioned. I mean, we had a confirmation service with the Bishop of London at St Martin's a couple of weeks ago, and I just love our confirmation services. They bring me to faith. You've got an asylum seeker there who said, I left Algeria. I was in the wilderness in this country and had no friends. I came to St Martin's. People befriended me. I realised I wasn't frightened anymore. I started sleeping through the night, even though I was still sleeping outside a lot of the time. I wanted to be part of a community that lived like this. And here I am, standing before the Bishop of London, asking to be confirmed. I mean, I'm not sure at what point on that you realise you've gone from step 4 to step 5. Well, I mean, that's only just a way of trying to codify a beautiful story like that.
There is a sense of you have to nail your colours to the last point.
Well, my guess is it comes. I mean, I'm going to use a really emotive example now because it's one that will be in the minds of everybody here. When those 2 young women were approached on the bus by a bunch of probably drunk young men and said, "Are you lesies? Kiss each other and prove it." They had a choice to make about whether they said who they were or whether they didn't. And they made that choice with a bit of defiance and quite a lot of sacrifice. Well, that seems to be I think that story should inspire all of us and all the people in our schools to say, I hope when somebody approaches me like that, I give a similar, comparable answer about who I am and face the consequences. I mean, that doesn't come to all of us, but that's what the Gospels imply will come to all of us.
Thank you. You suggested that we're all anti-foundationists.
I'm not saying we all are, but I'm saying I guess I'm saying I am. and if I am, that means I think we all are really. But you guys out there are foundations are just trying to shout loud.
Well, I think it's a perspective I see in the young people in my school. Actually, they want to question everything that to see the foundations that things are built on. But at the same time, you want to talk about essence and eternal truth. Can you say a bit more about how we can hold those things together?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a great question. But that's the reason why I framed it in poetic terms rather than as some sort of mathematical formula. As I said, I think in response to the first question, to the young Muslim or whatever, if they said, or as the humanist on Today programme this morning, said, extraordinary person. I mean, she wanted to make a distinction between faith and belief, which I simply don't comprehend. And she admitted she didn't have faith because she recognised what I was saying, that faith means believing there's a distinction between what lasts forever and what doesn't. And that I was saying that people of faith are those who want to talk about the significance of what lasts forever for what is now. But she said, despite that, she had beliefs, and they were there is a step, there is a step, and I think traditionally it comes, sentimentally when you see the sunset, when you see your first child born, what these sort of classic moments, if you like. But the point of those classic moments are, I think, wonder, love and praise, as Charles Wesley would put it. And I think wonder, love and praise are given to us partly to move us to faith. So, I'm not sure if people are familiar with this language of foundationalism and anti-foundationalism. It's probably was in fashion about 20 years ago. I mean, foundationalism is, it's this idea that you actually can get to some point, either in the human psyche or in the natural world. There's a kind of natural theology. You can actually get to a point where you can basically prove that God, the conviction about God is founded on something. And I think that's one of the things we have to let go of. And I guess I've been very influenced by, possibly the greatest anti-foundationalist of them all, Karl Barth, who says you can go on as long as you like searching for that, but I'm going to start with Jesus. And as you'll notice, particularly the third one about essence and existence is basically a Barthian theology for the 21st century, I would humbly suggest.
So there is no analogy of having God's essence is not to existence. You're moving strict.
Infinite qualitative difference. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you take a sort of Dionysian priority of God as the good over being, or John McLaren God without being. What is God's relationship to being if we don't participate in God's being?
Jesus is the answer. God, Jesus is fully human, and is thus the way we participate in God. And when Jesus is risen, ascended, and glorified, the Holy Spirit becomes that way in which we communicate. There's no sort of in the DNA correspondence between us and God. I read the image, made in the image of God in Genesis as prefiguring Christ. I read that Christologically. Yeah.
I like to say in my school that I don't believe that God exists. When there are these sort of interchanges with young people who say, I don't believe it. I say, well, I don't believe God exists either, in the same way that we exist. So in that sense. But while you were speaking, I really was thinking about this kind of distinction between this linear worldview and Greek worldview, where we break things up into categories. Heaven is up there and earth is down here, and the journey starts here, it ends there. As opposed to a more spiral worldview. I grew up in Africa. An African preacher doesn't preach 3 points. The African preacher has 1 point, and he or she goes round and round that point. And as you were speaking about the dance, I just thought, the experience of faith, even Thomas' experience of faith for him is a kind of toing and froing. You lose your faith and then you regain it again, and there's that kind of relationship.
Yeah, if I'd had my ways, I'd have had you guys for 3 days, and I'd have said, here's 4 ways of introducing the faith, and now in the course of the next 48 hours together, we're going to produce 43 more. And you've given a beautiful one there, but you've got other and more important things to discuss on your conference.
I think
it's over.
I hate doing this, Sam, but unfortunately, yes, we're in the existential moment of time, and I'm sure it would have been lovely. In fact, we might use that as a thought for a future conference. Do you fancy being with us for 4 days? It is a thought. But anyway, we need to bring this to an end. So I'd like to call on Reverend Mark Kenny to propose a vote of thanks to you.
Your talk reminded me that as an RS teacher over many years, I've encouraged lots of people to study theology, and one of the key reasons is particularly exemplified by your talk, which was a creative weaving together of philosophy and theology and the arts and poetry and politics in such a wonderful way. As a Christian, though, you've reminded me immensely of the call of God to each one of us, a call to liberation, to covenant, a call to the dance, a call to encounter essence, and a call to be confident in our faith. But I think the abiding thing I'll be left with is your analogy of the ballerina. And I say ballerina because I work in a school where on a daily basis I can encounter little girls running across the playground in tutus. And I love the image of the household of faith as a collection of individuals in tutus. And I particularly am grateful that the God that you described, the one that invites us to the dance, is not like our ballet teacher, because she is very strict and very rigorous about those 5 steps. But you invited us to see a God who invites us to dance with him or her, no matter how good at it we are, and to that I am grateful. So I would like to thank you on all our behalves today.